So hi everyone, and welcome to this screencast of early Islamic art. This screencast is just to give you a general overview of this style of art, and I'm hoping once you've watched this presentation you'll have a better understanding of its history and the influences it's had on Western art, and a bit of an idea of some of the artists from the various periods associated with the style. Now the thing about early Islamic art is that it's intrinsically tied to the Islamic faith, so you can't really have one without the other. And Islam is not just a religion, it's a way of life. And it has developed its own unique artistic language that's reflected in the art and architecture of the Muslim world. So it's the art of a civilization. Now the Muslim faith began when Muhammad, the last prophet, was said to have received the word of God, or Allah, from the angel Gabriel. So of course this is where the Quran, or the written word of God, comes from. And at first there were a lot of non-believers, and it wasn't until after the Prophet's death did Islam really take off. So we're going to start around mid-7th century, and they say that the speed with which Islam advanced through Europe, Asia and North Africa is one of the wonders of world history. So in a little more than 100 years, Islam expanded over 6,000 miles across 3 continents. And you can see here where it's expanded across those 3 continents. So you've got Northern Africa here, and Europe and Asia. Now, it wasn't just the military might that played a part in the impact Islam had. The nature of the Islamic faith appealed to millions of people. So Muslims aren't allowed to make images of the Prophet or God. And because of this ban on the depiction of the real world, particularly in relation to religious images, the imagination within Islamic art was realised through pattern and form, which brings us to Islamic architecture. And architecture and decoration became important Islamic art forms, and the 2 main architectural forms of the early Islamic period are the mosque and the palace. So Muslims usually built a large mosque after they'd taken over new territory as a sign of power and presence, and it also as a place where the whole Muslim population of a city could come together to pray. And some of these were extremely large, accommodating up to 100,000 men. There's usually only men that go to these places. And the mosque at Cordoba in Spain, which is the one pictured here, is a good example of the ornate decoration used in the mosques. The building is most notable for its giant arches, with over 1,000 columns of jasper, onyx, marble and granite. And these were made from pieces of the Roman temple and other destroyed Roman buildings. The double arches were a new introduction to architecture and helped support the tremendous weight of the high ceilings. The double arches consist of a lower horseshoe arch and an upper semicircular arch. We can see here. And the mosque also features richly gilded prayer niches, and a centrally located honeycombed dome has beautiful blue tiles decorated with stars. And the mihrab, which is a niche or a room that indicates the direction of Mecca, and there's one further along in this presentation. It's a masterpiece of architectural art with geometric and flowing designs of plants. The remains of the palaces built by the aristocracy give us an idea of their lifestyles and what the decoration was like. Outside, the palaces were pretty dull and boring, but the inside was filled with intense decorations such as mosaics and on the floor, and paintings on the walls and the floor, precious objects, richly coloured patterned textiles and lush carpets. Now the Alhambra Palace, which is the one pictured here, which is also in Spain, was begun in 1248. It's undergone many restorations with different rulers, so it's a mixture of Islamic and European architecture. So most of the design elements in decoration are based on plant themes, which are sometimes intermingled with abstract geometric shapes and in non-spiritual settings with animal figures. And these distinctive features of Islamic or Arab art are called arabesques. They make beautiful abstract patterns that can be quite complex but have the ability or the potential to be extended. So you can see here that this tile here can be extended. with that pattern. And they frequently appear on rugs and wall hangings, but because of their fragile nature, they're rare today and only pieces have survived. Like this fragment of a shawl, which tells us that it was a luxury item with the fringe and the fine, even weave and rich embellishment of the gold text. Rugs or mats are also used for Muslim prayer, which involves repeated kneeling and touching of the forehead to the floor. And nowhere else outside of China and Japan was calligraphy more highly cultivated, and it's here that the importance of the written word can be seen, not only in the fragile pages of the books, but also on the walls of buildings and other art forms. And notice the writing within the tiling of this mihrab in Iran. Now these are sayings of the Prophet and script from the Quran. It's very important inclusion in their design. And also note the pointed arch, which we'll revisit when we look at Islamic influences. Now, as we've seen, the main focus of Islamic art was on the architecture, the decorative influence on functional items and calligraphy, and because artisans were forbidden to represent the real world in a religious sense, paintings were restricted to the walls of palaces for private viewing and miniatures for manuscripts. Now, we can see that these paintings included quite a lot of human figures, and it wasn't until around the 16th century that portraits were painted. Early artworks had a strong Chinese influence, and one of the best known Islamic artists was Kamal al-Din Bizard. And notice that he leaves the area around the figures empty and unpatterned, and how he leads your eye through the painting, through the actions and the gestures of the figures. So there's a continual flow throughout the painting. And his paintings also have a narrative quality, so they tell a story. So I just want you to have a look at this painting. Just have a look carefully. It might be a bit difficult to see, but can you see the almost hidden eye and the partial face of the man as he peers out the blinds, watching the girls in the pool below? It's just up here. So now we come to Islamic influences on Western art. And I mentioned before about the pointed arches. And these had a major effect on Gothic art, which is renowned for this style of architecture. As you can see here in these arches, these Gothic artworks. The church here. And we also see the inclusion of Islamic art features within Western art, such as the script in this Renaissance painting and the carpet in this one. The two artists that were strongly influenced by this culture were Eugène Delacroix, and there's two of his artworks, and Henri Matisse. Now, Eugène Delacroix, a romanticist and one of my favourites, visited Morocco, and the work that followed shows significant inspiration and influence in his exotic and powerful artwork. So you can see here in the bottom one here of the death of Sardanapalus and the powerful imagery of his harem being executed and the rich textures and the textiles and things that included in that artwork. And the women and the Moroccan influence in the painting above that. And you can see in this painting here, called The Painter's Family by Matisse, how he was influenced by the single picture plane style. So with the floating figures, which we saw earlier in the Persian manuscript paintings by Bizard. So that basically concludes a little trip through early Islamic art. A couple of activities I'd like you to have a go at. And the first one is to visit a tile display centre and think about how modern day decorative mosaic designs have similarities to decoration in early Islamic architecture. And the other activity is knowing that one of the most common objects in Western domestic use is the Middle Eastern carpet. Why do you think this form of useful decoration has been popular in the West for centuries? So, thank you for listening, and good luck with that.